Chapter 1. The Shattered Heirloom. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Ashbourne Manor, a sprawling estate nestled in the heart of the English countryside. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable grey suit, a stark contrast to the golden hues of the fading season, stepped from the chauffeur-driven car and adjusted his moustache with a practiced flick. The invitation to the manor had arrived at his London flat 2 days prior, penned in the elegant hand of Lady Eleanor Ashby. It was not a social call, for Poirot seldom indulged in such frivolities. No, the letter had hinted at a matter most urgent, a mystery, perhaps, that required the little grey cells of the great detective. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, followed Poirot up the gravel path, his eyes wide with admiration for the manor's ivy-clad facade. "Rather grand, isn't it, Poirot?" he remarked, gesturing to the towering windows and stone gargoyles perched above. "Grand, oui, but it is the secrets within that interest, Poirot," the detective replied, his voice clipped and precise. "This manor, it has the air of one who hides much beneath its charm." The heavy oak door swung open before they could knock, revealing a butler with a face as stern as the gargoyles above. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he intoned, bowing slightly. "Lady Ashby awaits you in the drawing-room." They were led through a labyrinth of corridors adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors. The drawing-room was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers gleamed, and a fire roared in a marble hearth. Lady Eleanor Ashby, a woman of 60 with silver hair and an air of quiet authority, rose to greet them. Her emerald gown shimmered, but her expression was one of barely concealed distress. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming on such short notice," she said, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. "I fear we are in the midst of a calamity." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, your letter spoke of a matter most delicate. Pray, enlighten Poirot." Lady Eleanor gestured to a velvet-lined box on the mahogany table beside her. Within it lay a brooch, or rather the remnants of one. Sapphires, once set in an intricate gold filigree, were scattered like fallen stars, and the delicate frame was twisted and broken. "This," she said, her voice trembling, "is the Ashby brooch, a family heirloom passed down for 5 generations. It is priceless, not merely for its jewels, but for what it represents. Last night it was found in this state, and I cannot fathom how or why." Hastings leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "Good heavens, its set's been smashed to bits. Was it dropped, perhaps?" Poirot's eyes gleamed as he examined the brooch without touching it. "Non, mon ami, this is no accident. The damage, it is deliberate. Observe the precision of the breaks, the force applied to the center. Someone wished to destroy this treasure, and perhaps its meaning." Lady Eleanor Sepp's hands clasped tightly. "But who would do such a thing? The brooch was locked in my private study, and only a few in this household knew of its existence." "Then we must begin with those few," Poirot said, his tone calm yet commanding. "Tell me, madame, who resides in this manor?" Lady Eleanor sighed, settling into an armchair. "There is my nephew Reginald Ashby, who returned from London only yesterday. He is troubled, prone to recklessness, but I cannot believe he would stoop to this. Then there is Miss Clara Dunham, the governess to my late sister's children, who has been with us for 3 years. She is reserved but loyal. The butler, Mr. Grayson, has served the family for decades. There are also the usual staff maids, a cook, and the gardener, Mr. Finch, who keeps to himself." "And guests?" Poirot pressed, his gaze sharp. "Only one," Lady Eleanor replied. "Mrs. Beatrice Langley, an old friend from my youth, arrived 2 days ago. She was present last night at dinner, when the brooch was still intact." Poirot nodded, his mind already cataloguing details. "And this dinner? It was uneventful?" Lady Eleanor hesitated. "Not entirely. Reginald was agitated, arguing with Mr. Grayson over some trivial matter. Miss Dunham seemed distracted. And Beatrice, she asked about the brooch, its history. I thought nothing of it at the time." "Everything, madame, is of consequence," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "Now, may Poirot see the study where this brooch was kept?" The study was a small, oak-paneled room lined with books and lit by a single window. A sturdy desk dominated the space, its lock intact, but bearing faint scratches around the keyhole. Poirot's eyes darted to the floor, where a single sapphire glinted beneath a chair. "Curieux," he murmured, retrieving it with a handkerchief. "This stone, it was not with the others. It suggests haste, perhaps, or interruption." Hastings frowned. "You think the culprit was disturbed mid-act?" "Perhaps, mon ami. Or perhaps they wished us to believe so." Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on a portrait of a stern woman in a high-collared gown, a brooch identical to the broken one pinned to her chest. "This is the original owner, oui?" Lady Eleanor nodded. "My great-grandmother, Lady Margaret Ashby. The brooch was her wedding gift. Said to hold a secret known only to the women of our line." "A secret?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. Her lips tightened. "I know only that it exists. My mother spoke of it in whispers. But she died before passing it on. The brooch was to be mine until I chose a successor." Poirot's expression remained inscrutable, but his mind was alight. A secret tied to a destroyed heirloom suggested motives beyond mere vandalism, greed perhaps, or vengeance. "Madame, I will require a list of all who were in the manor last night, and I must speak with them individually. The little grey cells, they demand precision." As they returned to the drawing-room, the dinner gong sounded, summoning the household. Reginald Ashby, a lanky man with restless eyes, entered first, followed by Miss Clara Dunham, whose pale face betrayed unease. Mr. Grayson, the butler, moved with mechanical precision, while Mrs. Langley swept in with an air of detached amusement. The maids hovered at the edges, and Poirot noted the absence of the gardener, Finch. Dinner was a tense affair. Reginald drank heavily, his remarks sharp and barbed. Miss Dunham barely spoke, her eyes darting to the velvet box on the sideboard. Mrs. Langley, by contrast, was effusive, regaling the table with tales of her travels, though Poirot sensed calculation in her charm. Grayson's stoic presence seemed to anchor the room, yet his hands trembled slightly as he poured the wine. As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his voice cutting through the murmur. "Mesdames et messieurs, a crime has been committed in this house. The destruction of the Ashworth brooch is no mere accident. Poirot will uncover the truth, but I require your cooperation. Tomorrow we begin." The room fell silent, eyes wide with shock or suspicion. Poirot's gaze swept over them, noting every flicker of expression. The puzzle of the broken brooch had begun, and the little grey cells were already at work. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Drawing-Room. The morning after the tense dinner at Ashby Manor, a heavy mist clung to the estate's grounds, shrouding the ancient oaks and lending an air of secrecy to the already enigmatic house. Hercule Poirot, ever fastidious, adjusted his tie before settling into the drawing-room, where a fire crackled against the autumn chill. The room, with its velvet drapes and polished mahogany, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the detective's intent to unravel its secrets. Captain Hastings, nursing a cup of tea, stood by the window, his face a mixture of curiosity and impatience. "Poirot, do you really think this lot is hiding something?" Hastings asked, gesturing toward the closed door through which the household would soon pass. "They seem a bit rattled, but smashing a brooch, it suds rather peculiar, doesn't set you think?" "Peculiar, oui, but not without purpose," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a predator stalking prey. "The brooch, it is not merely an object. It is a symbol, a key to something greater. Today, mon ami, we listen not only to words, but to the silences between them. To sue?" The first to be summoned was Lady Eleanor Ashby, who entered with the grace of a woman accustomed to command, though her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. Poirot gestured to an armchair, his demeanor polite but unyielding. "Madame, let us begin with the history of this brooch. You spoke of a secret. What tales does the Ashby family tell of its origins?" Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened around the armrest. "The brooch was crafted for my great-grandmother, Lady Margaret, in 1820. It was a gift from her husband, Lord Henry Ashby, upon their marriage. Family legend. Claims it holds a secret, though I know little of it. My mother once said it was tied to a vow, a promise that bound the women of our line. She died before explaining further. Poirot's moustache twitched. And this vow, it was known to others in the household. Not to my knowledge, Lady Eleanor said, her voice firm. Only the women of the direct line were privy to its significance. I intended to pass it to my niece, but her voice faltered. She passed away years ago. Poirot noted the flicker of grief, but pressed on. Last night at dinner you mentioned the brooch to Mrs. Langley. Why? Lady Eleanor hesitated. Beatrice asked about family heirlooms. She's always been curious about such things. I mentioned the brooch in passing, nothing more. En passant, perhaps, but significant, Poirot murmured. He dismissed her gently, his mind already turning over the implications of her words. Next came Reginald Ashby, Lady Eleanor's nephew, whose dishevelled appearance and bloodshot eyes spoke of a night spent with more than just worry. He slumped into the chair, his hands fidgeting. Look, Monsieur Poirot, I don't know anything about that blasted brooch. I was in London until yesterday, and I've no interest in family trinkets. Poirot's gaze was piercing, and yet, monsieur, you argued with Mr. Grayson at dinner. Was this related to the brooch? Reginald Sett's jaw tightened. Grayson Sett's been hounding me about my debts, thinks I set's my disgrace to the family name. Yes. It had nothing to do with some old jewelry. Debt is a powerful motive, Poirot said softly. Where were you last night, after dinner? In my room, drinking. Reginald admitted, his tone defiant. Ask anyone. I didn't leave until morning. Poirot made a mental note of the alibi, though its simplicity raised suspicions. As Reginald left, Miss Clara Dunham, the governess, entered. Her pale face and tightly clasped hands suggested a nervous disposition, but her eyes held a quiet resolve. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, I know nothing of this affair, she said before he could ask. Assurance is not evidence, mademoiselle, Poirot replied, his tone mild but firm. You were distracted at dinner. What troubled you? Clara Sepp's lips parted, then closed. I was thinking of the children. They've been restless since their mother Sepp's death. I heard a noise last night near the study, but I thought it was the wind. A noise? Poirot leaned forward. Describe it, if you please. A sort of thud, like something heavy falling, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was around midnight. I didn't set to investigate. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he dismissed her with a nod. The butler, Mr. Grayson, was next, his posture rigid and his face impassive. I have served this family for 30 years, sir, he said. I would never harm its legacy. Yet you argued with Monsieur Reginald, Poirot observed, and you have access to the study. Tell me, what is this talk of a curse upon the brooch? Grayson Sapp's composure faltered. It's Sapp's an old tale, sir. Servant Sapp's gossip. They say the brooch brings misfortune to those who betray its secret. I never believed it, but some in the household do. Some, Poirot pressed. The maids, perhaps. And Finch, the gardener. He's a superstitious sort, Grayson said. His voice clipped. As Grayson departed, Poirot turned to Hastings. The curse, it is a convenient distraction, but it plants fear, and fear breeds mistakes. The final interview was with Mrs. Beatrice Langley, whose vibrant energy filled the room like a burst of sunlight. Her laughter was light, but Poirot sensed a calculated edge. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you set making much ado about nothing. A broken brooch. Surely it was an accident. Nothing is accidental in a house such as this, Poirot replied. You asked Lady Eleanor about the brooch. Why the interest? Beatrice shrugged, her smile unwavering. I am a collector of stories, you might say. Old families like the Ashworths have such fascinating histories. I merely wanted to know more. Poirot dismissed her, his mind buzzing. As Hastings began to speculate, Poirot raised a hand. Un moment, mon ami. Let us explore this room. His eyes scanned the walls, settling on a small writing desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and, with a triumphant "Ah," withdrew a folded letter, its edges yellowed with age. The letter, written in a spidery hand, spoke of a betrayal within the Ashbury family. A sister wronged, a promise broken, and the brooch as a symbol of that vow. "This," Poirot said, "is no mere heirloom. It is a key to a wound unhealed." Hastings frowned. "But who would destroy it? And why now?" "That, mon ami, is the puzzle," Poirot said, his voice low. "The whispers in this room, they speak of greed, of vengeance, of secrets buried too long. We must listen closely, for the truth is near." As the mist thickened outside, Poirot knew the broken brooch was only the beginning. The drawing-room, with its secrets and silences, had given him the first pieces of the puzzle. The little grey cells were at work, and the mystery of Ashby Manor was far from solved. Chapter 3. The Locked Study. The clock in Ashbury Manor's grand hall chimed midnight, its sombre toll echoing through the silent corridors. Hercule Poirot, roused from his thoughts by a faint but unmistakable crash, sat upright in his guest-room. The sound, sharp and deliberate, came from the direction of the west wing where Lady Eleanor's study lay. With the precision of a man accustomed to action in the face of mystery, Poirot slipped on his dressing gown, seized his pocket torch, and stepped into the darkened hallway. Captain Hastings, bleary-eyed but alert, joined him moments later, having heard the same disturbance. "Poirot, what was that?" Hastings whispered, his voice taut with unease. It sounded like trouble. "Trouble, oui, or perhaps opportunity," Poirot replied, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "The study, mon ami. It calls to us. Let us see what secrets it reveals." The west wing was a maze of shadows, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish. The study door, solid oak with an ornate brass lock, stood closed, but a sliver of light escaped from beneath. Poirot tested the handle. It was locked as expected. He produced a small tool from his pocket, a relic of past investigations, and with a deft twist the lock yielded. The door creaked open, revealing a room in disarray. The study, so orderly during Poirot's earlier visit, now bore signs of a struggle. A chair lay overturned, its cushion askew. Books had tumbled from a shelf, their pages splayed like broken wings. On the desk, the velvet box containing the shattered Ashby brooch remained untouched, but a drawer hung open, its contents scattered. Poirot's torch beam danced across the scene, pausing on a torn scrap of grey fabric caught on the desk's edge. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, crouching to examine the fabric. "This is no accident. Someone was here, and they were interrupted."
Hastings, peering over his shoulder, frowned. "Interrupted? By us, you mean? That crash we heard?"
"Précisément," Poirot said, rising. The sound was no mere accident. It was the sound of haste, of panic. But what were they seeking? His eyes swept the room, settling on a book that lay open on the floor, its spine cracked. It was a volume of Ashby family history, and a single page was marked by a faint smudge of ink. Poirot lifted it carefully, noting a passage about Lady Margaret Ashby, the brooch's original owner, and her mysterious disappearance in 1825. "Look here, Poirot," Hastings said, pointing to the floor near the window. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, marred the polished wood. Someone stood here, perhaps watching the grounds. Poirot nodded, his mind racing, or escaping. "The window, it is unlatched." He crossed to it, noting the damp earth visible outside. "No footprints, alas. The mist has covered much. But this mark, it suggests movement, urgency." The detective returned to the desk, his fingers tracing the scratches around the lock he had noted earlier. "These marks, they are fresh, but not from tonight. The brooch was taken and broken before this intrusion. Tonight's visitor sought something else, perhaps the secret of which Lady Eleanor spoke." Hastings shivered, the chill of the room seeping into his bones. "But who, Poirot, and why come back?" "That, mon ami, is why we must speak to those with access." Poirot's sister's voice was firm. "The butler, Mr. Grayson. He mentioned his long service. He has keys, non?" We shall begin with him." By morning, the household was abuzz with whispers of the midnight disturbance. Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the late night, summoned Grayson to the drawing-room. The butler stood rigid, his grey uniform immaculate, though Poirot noted a slight tremor in his hands. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot began, his tone deceptively mild, "you have served the Ashby family for 30 years. You have access to the study, oui?" "Yes, sir," Grayson replied, his voice steady but his eyes wary. "I hold a master key, but I assure you I was in my quarters last night." "And yet," Poirot said, producing the scrap of grey fabric, "this matches the shade of your uniform. It was found in the study, caught on the desk. Explain, if you please." Grayson Day's composure faltered, a flush creeping up his neck. "I was in the study yesterday morning, sir, to deliver Lady Eleanor Sept's correspondence. The desk is sharp. It must have caught my sleeve." "A plausible explanation," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "But the study was disturbed last night, after midnight. Where were you then?" "In my room, sir," Grayson insisted. "I heard nothing until the maids mentioned the noise this morning." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "And this talk of a curse, monsieur? You spoke of it yesterday. What do you know of the brooch Sept's misfortune?" Grayson Sept's lips tightened. "It's Sept's superstition, sir. The maids say the brooch brings ruin to those who misuse it. I Sept's heard tales of Lady Margaret Sept's disappearance, how she vanished after a quarrel over the brooch, but I put no stock in such stories." Poirot dismissed him, his mind cataloguing the butler Sept's unease. "He knows more than he says. Hastings," he murmured. "The fabric, the alibi, they are too convenient, but is he the culprit, or merely a pawn?" As the morning progressed, Poirot returned to the study, this time with Lady Eleanor. She gasped at the disarray, her hand clutching her throat. "This is monstrous. First the brooch, now this." "Madame," Poirot said, "the intruder sought something specific. The brooch was not touched tonight. Is there another item in this study of value, perhaps tied to the secret you mentioned?" Lady Eleanor shook her head, her eyes distant. "I keep nothing else of such significance here. Only papers, books. Nothing that would warrant this." Poirot Sept's gaze fell on the portrait of Lady Margaret, its stern eyes seeming to watch him. "This secret," he said, "it is tied to your great-grandmother, non? The book I found open. It speaks of her disappearance. Was there a rival, perhaps, for the brooch?" Lady Eleanor hesitated. There were rumors, a sister, Lady Charlotte, who envied Margaret Sept's marriage and the brooch, but that was a century ago. "A century, oui, but grudges linger," Poirot said. "We must consider all possibilities." As they left the study, Poirot's mind churned. The torn fabric, the scuffing mark, the open book, all were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. The locked study had yielded clues, but also questions. Was Grayson's alibi a lie, or was he protecting someone else? And what had the intruder sought, if not the brooch itself? "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "this is getting murkier by the minute. Do you think the curse is real?" Poirot Sept's mustache twitched. "A curse, mon ami, is but a story to frighten the gullible. The truth lies in human motives. Greed, envy, betrayal. The locked study has spoken, and Poirot listens. The next piece of the puzzle awaits." Chapter 4. The gardener Sept's secret. The mist that had cloaked Ashby Manor's grounds the previous day lingered into the late morning, curling around the ancient yews and lending the estate an air of melancholy. Hercule Poirot, clad in a neatly pressed overcoat, stood at the edge of the manicured lawn, his sharp eyes fixed on the distant figure of Mr. Finch, the gardener. The man, hunched and weathered, was pruning a rosebush with a ferocity that seemed more personal than professional. Captain Hastings, trailing behind Poirot, rubbed his hands against the chill. "Poirot, are you sure about this fellow?" Hastings asked, his breath visible in the damp air. "He's just a gardener. Surely he's not mixed up in this brooch business." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his disapproval at such hasty conclusions. Mon ami, in a house of secrets, no one is merely what they seem. Mr. Finch was seen near the manor the night the brooch was broken. His solitude, his silence, they intrigue Poirot. We shall see what the little grey cells uncover. They approached the gardener's shed, a weathered structure tucked behind a copse of elms. The door was ajar, revealing a cluttered interior, tools hung on rusted hooks, seed packets spilled across a workbench, and a faint smell of earth and tobacco hung in the air. Finch, alerted by their footsteps, turned sharply, his eyes narrowing beneath a battered cap. He was a man of perhaps 60, his face etched with lines that spoke of hard years and harder memories. "Monsieur Finch," Poirot began, his voice smooth but commanding, "a word, if you please. You are aware of the misfortune that has befallen the Ashborough brooch." Finch asserted, trip tightened on his pruning shears. "Heard about it, sir. Terrible thing, but I keep to my gardens. Don't sip know nothing about jewels." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "And yet you were seen near the west wing on the night of the incident, near the study. What brought you so close to the manor at such an hour?" Finch's jaw clenched, and for a moment Poirot thought he might bolt. "I was checking the roses," he muttered. "Some of Situm get blight this time of year. I work late sometimes." "A dedicated man," Poirot said, his tone laced with skepticism. "But the roses, they are here, far from the manor. Perhaps you heard something? A noise, perhaps, like the one last night." Finch's eyes darted to the ground. "Didn't set hear nothing. I was in my shed by midnight." Poirot stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Monsieur, the truth is a delicate flower. It wilts under pressure. Tell me, what is your connection to the Ashworth family? You have served here for many years." "None." Finch hesitated, then sighed, his shoulders slumping. 25 years, sir. I came on when Lady Eleanor Sepp's father was still master, but I Sepsam just the gardener, no more, no less." "And yet," Poirot pressed, "there is talk of a curse, of misfortune tied to the brooch." "You are a superstitious man," Monsieur Grayson said. "What do you know of this?" Finch's face darkened. "Old tales. The maids chatter about the brooch bringing ruin. They say Lady Margaret, the one it was made for, vanished because of it. I don't sept hold with curses, but there's sep's bad blood in this family, always has been." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bad blood? Speak plainly, monsieur." Finch glanced around, as if the trees themselves might eavesdrop. "Years ago, before my time, there was a groundskeeper, Tom Wickers. He disappeared sudden-like back in '95. Folks said he knew something about the brooch, something he shouldn't. Never found him. Some think he ran off. Others reckon he was done in." Hastings, unable to contain himself, blurted, "Done in? You mean murdered?" Finch shrugged, his expression guarded. "I sem's just saying what Fess said. Wickers was close to Lady Eleanor Semp's mother. Too close, maybe. After he vanished, the family hushed it up." Poirot's mind raced, cataloguing this new thread. "And where were you, Monsieur Finch, when this Wickers disappeared?" Finch said's eyes flashed with defiance. "I wasn't sept here yet, sir. I came a year later. Ask Lady Eleanor if you don't sept believe me." Poirot nodded, filing away the gardener Sep's defensiveness. "One final question. The night the brooch was broken, did you see anyone near the manor? Anyone at all?" Finch hesitated, then muttered, "Saw Miss Dunham, the governess, walking the grounds late. Looked like she was heading toward the west wing. But I didn't think nothing of it." Poirot dismissed him with a nod, his mind already turning over the implications. As Finch returned to his roses, Hastings whispered, "Good Lord, Poirot, a missing groundskeeper. This is getting darker by the minute." "Dark. Oui, but illuminating," Poirot replied. "The gardener, he knows more than he tells, but his fear, it is genuine. We must verify his story. And this Miss Dunham, her nocturnal wanderings intrigue me." They returned to the manor, where Poirot sought out Lady Eleanor in the library. She sat by a window, her face pale as she stared at the mist-shrouded grounds. Madame, Poirot said, "A word about your gardener, Mr. Finch. He speaks of a groundskeeper, Tom Wickers, who vanished. What can you tell Poirot of this?" Lady Eleanor Setz. Hand trembled, spilling a drop of tea from her cup. Tom Wickers. That was a sad affair. He was a good man, loyal to my mother. He left suddenly without a word. We assumed he found work elsewhere. Assumed. Poirot's sister's tone was gentle but probing. There was no investigation. None was needed, she said sharply. It was a different time. People came and went. Poirot's eyes narrowed, and his connection to the brooch. Lady Eleanor Sims' gaze flickered. There was none to my knowledge. Why do you ask? A hunch, madam, Poirot said, rising. The past, it has a way of whispering to the present. As they left the library, Poirot led Hastings to the Manor's archives, a dusty room filled with ledgers and letters. After an hour of searching, Poirot unearthed a payroll record from 1895, listing Tom Wickers. A scrawled note in the margin read, "Payment ceased, October, no forwarding address." Nearby, a faded photograph showed a young man with a serious face, standing beside a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Lady Eleanor's mother.
"This Wickers,"
Poirot said. "He was no mere groundskeeper. There is a story here, Hastings, one the Ashbourne family has buried. The brooch, the disappearance, the gardener sphere, they are connected." The day waned, and the mist thickened as if conspiring to hide the truth. Poirot stood at the archive window, his mind a whirl of clues: Finch's evasiveness, Miss Dunham's late-night walk, and a groundskeeper lost to time. The gardener's secret had cracked open a door to the past, but the puzzle of the broken brooch remained unsolved. "The little grey cells," Poirot murmured. "They are restless. The next piece awaits us, mon ami." Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The afternoon sun pierced the persistent mist, casting a pale glow through the tall windows of Ashby Manor's conservatory. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes clicking softly on the tiled floor, paced among the ferns and orchids, his mind as sharp as the shears that tended them. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, adjusted his collar against the humid air, his expression a mix of curiosity and frustration. "Poirot's, this business with the gardener, and that missing groundskeeper, it seems all so murky," Hastings said, swatting at a stray leaf. "Do you really think the past has anything to do with the brooch being smashed?" Poirot paused, his eyes gleaming like polished jet. "Mon ami, the past is never truly past. It lingers like the scent of these flowers, shaping the present in ways unseen. The brooch, it is a thread that binds the Ashbourne family to its history. Today we seek one who knows that history well." They had come to the conservatory to meet Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Lady Eleanor's childhood friend, whose vibrant presence contrasted sharply with the Manor's sombre mood. Beatrice sat on a wicker chaise, her auburn hair catching the light as she sipped tea with an air of casual elegance. Her eyes, however, held a flicker of wariness as Poirot approached. "Madame Langley," Poirot began, settling into a chair opposite her, "you have known Lady Eleanor since childhood. You know the tales of this family. Non, tell Poirot of the brooch, of Lady Margaret Ashby, and of the scandal that clings to her name." Beatrice, smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, setting her teacup down with a delicate clink. "You don't waste time, Monsieur Poirot. Very well, I still tell you what I know, but it seems an old story, half forgotten even by Eleanor." She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the glass ceiling, as if summoning memories from the ether. Lady Margaret Ashby was Eleanor's great-grandmother, married to Lord Henry in 1820. The brooch was his gift to her, a symbol of their union, but Margaret was unconventional. She was beautiful, headstrong, and fiercely independent, qualities that didn't sit well with the Ashby family. There were whispers of a scandal, something to do with her sister, Lady Charlotte. Poirot's moustache twitched. A sister, Lady Eleanor mentioned her briefly, with reluctance. What was this scandal? Beatrice's voice lowered, as if the conservatory's walls might betray her words. Charlotte was the younger sister, plain where Margaret was radiant and bitterly jealous. The story goes that Charlotte coveted the brooch, not for its beauty, but for what it represented. Some say it held a secret, a promise between Margaret and Henry. Charlotte believed she was entitled to it, claiming Margaret had stolen Henry's affection. There was a public quarrel at a ball in 1824, and shortly after, Margaret vanished. Hastings leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Vanished? Just like that groundskeeper, Wickers?" "Presses him," Poirot said, his tone sharp. "Madame, what became of Charlotte after this disappearance?" Beatrice shrugged, though her nonchalance seemed forced. "Charlotte never married. She lived out her days in a cottage on the estate, bitter and reclusive. The family claimed Margaret ran off with a lover, but there were darker rumors. Some said Charlotte had a hand in her sister Septa's fate." Poirot Septa's mind raced, piecing together fragments. "And the brooch, it remained in the family?" "Yes," Beatrice said. "It passed to Margaret's daughter, then to Eleanor's mother, and finally to Eleanor. But the whispers of a curse began after Margaret's disappearance. Servants said the brooch brought misfortune to those who betrayed its secret. I always thought it nonsense, but Eleanor, she believes there's truth in it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You asked about the brooch at dinner, madame? Why such interest in an old tale?" Beatrice laughed, a touch too brightly. "Curiosity, monsieur, or from a romantic at heart, drawn to old mysteries. Eleanor Sep's so secretive about the brooch, I couldn't resist prodding." Poirot nodded, unconvinced. "And this secret, did Eleanor ever speak of it to you?" "Only in passing," Beatrice said, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "She said it was a burden, something only the women of the line could understand. I didn't press her." As Poirot dismissed her, he turned to Hastings. "She knows more than she reveals, mon ami. Her curiosity, it is too pointed, too deliberate. We must watch Madame Langley." The conversation lingered in Poirot's mind as he and Hastings returned to the Manor's library, seeking more clues about Margaret's disappearance. Among the dusty shelves, Poirot found a journal, its leather cover cracked with age. The inscription read, "Margaret Ashby, 1823. He opened it carefully, revealing elegant handwriting that chronicled Margaret's life, her love for Henry, her joy in the brooch, and her growing fear of Charlotte's envy. One entry, dated months before her disappearance, stood out. "Charlotte came to me tonight, wild with rage. She claims the brooch is hers by right, that I stole Henry's heart with deceit. I fear her anger, but more, I fear the secret she seeks. The brooch must never fall into her hands." Poirot closed the journal, his expression grave. "This secret, Hastings, it is no mere family vow. It is something tangible, something worth destroying for. The brooch's destruction was no act of vandalism. It was a strike at the heart of the Ashby legacy." Hastings frowned. "But why now? Margaret Sip's been gone a century. Who would care about an old feud?" "Someone who knows its value," Poirot said. "Perhaps someone in this house or someone who has returned." His thoughts drifted to Reginald with his debts and agitation, to Miss Dunham, seen near the study, to Finch with his cryptic tales, and now to Beatrice, whose charm masked a keen interest in the brooch. As evening fell, Poirot stood by the library window, watching the mist curl around the manor like a shroud. The journal had opened a window to the past, but the shadows it cast reached into the present. Margaret's disappearance, Charlotte's envy, the brooch's secret, they were threads in a tapestry of betrayal. The question was, who in Ashby Manor was pulling those threads apart? "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "do you think Beatrice is involved? She seems too cheerful to be a villain." Poirot Sip's lips curved into a faint smile. The cheerful mon ami are often the most dangerous. They hide their motives behind smiles. But fear not, the little grey cells, they are weaving the truth from these shadows. The past has spoken, and we are closer to the heart of the puzzle. The manor settled into an uneasy quiet, but Poirot knew the calm was deceptive. The brooch's destruction, the midnight intrusion, the gardener's secrets, and now Margaret's journal, all pointed to a truth buried deep in Ashby's history. The shadows of the past were growing longer, and Poirot was determined to bring them into the light. Chapter 6. The Midnight Visitor. The moon hung low over Ashby Manor, its silver light struggling to pierce the persistent mist that clung to the estate like a jealous lover. Hercule Poirot, restless despite the late hour, sat by his bedroom window, his sharp eyes scanning the darkened grounds. The events of the past days, the broken brooch, the disturbed study, the gardener's cryptic tales, and the shadows of Lady Margaret's scandal had set his little grey cells ablaze. Sleep was a luxury he could not afford when the puzzle remained unsolved. A faint rustle, barely audible over the creak of the manor's ancient timbers, snapped Poirot to attention. It came from the garden below, near the west wing. He leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass, and caught a glimpse of a shadowed figure moving swiftly through the shrubbery. The figure paused, as if sensing observation, then darted toward the manor's wall. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered, seizing his torch and slipping into his shoes with the speed of a man half his age. He threw on his dressing gown and hurried into the corridor, where Captain Hastings, roused by the sound of Poirot's door, emerged bleary-eyed. "Poirot, what sip's the matter?" Hastings asked, his voice thick with sleep. "A visitor, mon ami," Poirot said, his tone urgent but controlled. "Quickly, we must not let them escape." They descended the grand staircase, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets, and slipped out through a side door into the chill night air. The mist was thicker now, swirling around them like a living thing, obscuring the grounds. Poirot's torch cut through the haze, revealing trampled grass near the rosebeds where Finch had been working. "This way," he whispered, following the trail toward the west wing. The trail led to a low stone wall, where the figure had vanished. Poirot crouched, his torch illuminating a patch of disturbed earth. "Fresh footprints," he said, noting their small size. "Not a man-set's, perhaps, or a man with uncommonly delicate feet." Hastings shivered, his eyes scanning the darkness. Whoever it was, they were gone now. Why would they come so close to the manor at this hour? Poirot's gaze fell on a scrap of paper, half buried in the soil. He retrieved it with his handkerchief, unfolding it to reveal a hastily scrawled note in black ink. "The brooch hides the key. Beware the one who watches." The handwriting was uneven, as if written in haste or fear. "A warning," Poirot said, his voice low. "Or a misdirection. This note, it is deliberate, meant to be found. But by whom?" Hastings frowned. "The brooch is already broken. What key could it hide?" "That, mon ami, is the heart of the puzzle," Poirot replied, tucking the note into his pocket. "Come, we must retrace the intruder's path." They circled the manor, following faint traces of disturbed leaves and snapped twigs. The trail ended at a servant's entrance, its door slightly ajar. Poirot pushed it open, revealing a narrow passage leading to the kitchen. A faint smear of mud on the stone floor confirmed the intruder's entry. They came inside, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But for what purpose? The kitchen was silent, its copper pots gleaming in the torchlight. Poirot's beam swept the room, pausing on a drawer left slightly open. Inside, among knives and utensils, lay a single sapphire, the twin of the one Poirot had found in the study. "Curieux," he murmured. "Another piece of the brooch, left here. But why?" Hastings scratched his head. "It sets almost as if they set taunting us, Poirot, dropping clues like breadcrumbs. Or leading us astray," Poirot said. "The little grey cells, they sense a pattern, but it is not yet clear. This sapphire, it was placed here tonight, after the intruder fled. We were meant to find it." They returned to the grounds, but the mist had swallowed any further traces of the visitor. Poirot stood by the rosebeds, his mind racing. The note speaks of a key, and the brooch, sept's fragments are scattered with purpose. Someone wishes to control the narrative of this crime. By morning, the household was abuzz with whispers of the midnight intrusion. Poirot summoned Lady Eleanor to the drawing-room, showing her the note and the sapphire. Her face paled as she read the scrawled words. "This is madness," she said, her voice trembling. The brooch is destroyed. What key could it hide? Madame Poirot said. The note suggests the brooch contained something more than jewels. Perhaps a mechanism, a compartment. Did you ever examine it closely? Lady Eleanor shook her head. It was too delicate. I never thought, could it truly hold such a secret? Poirot Sipser's eyes gleamed. We shall see, but tell me who in this house might watch from the shadows. Lady Eleanor hesitated. Asat felt eyes on me sometimes at night. I thought it was my imagination. But Miss Dunham, she sit's been restless wandering the grounds, and Reginald, he sit's been secretive since his return. Poirot nodded, dismissing her. He then sought out Mr. Grayson, whose grey uniform now seemed suspiciously pristine. Monsieur Grayson, a figure was seen last night. You were in your quarters, we? Yes, sir, Grayson said, his voice steady but his eyes flickering. I heard nothing. The servants' said quarters are far from the west wing. And yet, Poirot said, producing the sapphire, this was found in the kitchen. You oversee the staff. Have you seen anyone near the servants' servants? Grayson Sepp's composure held, but his fingers twitched. No, sir. The maids were abed. Perhaps, Finch. He Sepp's often out late. Poirot dismissed him, his suspicions deepening. The note, the sapphire, the footprints. They pointed to someone within the manor, someone with intimate knowledge of its secrets. He turned to Hastings, who was pacing nervously. Poirot, this is getting out of hand. A midnight prowler, cryptic notes. It's like something out of a penny dreadful. Non mon ami, Poirot said, his voice firm. It is a puzzle, and every piece fits, though the shape eludes us. The intruder wishes to guide our thoughts, but Poirot is not so easily led. As the day progressed, Poirot examined the broken brooch again, its twisted gold and scattered sapphires mocking his efforts. He traced its filigree, searching for a hidden catch or compartment, but found none. The key, he murmured. It is not literal, perhaps. A secret, a truth, locked within the brooch's history. The manor seemed to close in around him, its walls whispering of betrayal and hidden motives. The midnight visitor had left a trail, but was it a warning or a trap? Poirot's little grey cells churned, piecing together the gardener's secrets, the study's disturbance, and Margaret's scandal. The puzzle of the broken brooch was growing more complex, but Poirot was undeterred. The truth, he knew, was waiting in the shadows. Chapter 7. The Governess' Tale. The late morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Ashby Manor's morning room, casting a soft glow on the polished furniture and the tense figure of Miss Clara Dunham. Hercule Poirot, seated opposite her, observed the governess with the precision of a watchmaker, his sharp eyes noting the faint tremble in her hands and the way her gaze darted to the door. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity as the air grew thick with anticipation. Miss Dunham, Poirot began, his voice smooth but laced with authority. You have been most elusive in this affair of the broken brooch. Poirot observes, and he sees a woman troubled. You heard a noise near the study, you walked the grounds at night, and yet you claim to know nothing. It is time, mademoiselle, to share your tale. Clara sips, pale cheeks flushed, and she clasped her hands tightly in her lap. I Seps told you all I know, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I Seps am only the governess. I care for the children, nothing more. Poirot's mustache twitched, the sign of his impatience with evasion. Non, mademoiselle. No one is only anything in a house such as this. You were seen near the west wing the night the brooch was broken, and last night a figure fled the manor, leaving a note and a sapphire. These are not the actions of an innocent bystander. Speak, or Poirot will assume you hide the truth. Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of flight. Then, with a shuddering breath, she began. I didn't want to get involved. I came to Ashby Manor 3 years ago, after the children's mother died. Lady Eleanor was kind to take me on, but I've always felt out of place. The brooch, it's part of the family's mystique. The servants talk of its curse, and I overheard things I shouldn't have. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "What things, mademoiselle? Be precise." Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her skirt. The night the brooch was broken, I couldn't sleep. The children were restless, and I went to check on them. As I passed the west wing, I heard voices, low, angry. I couldn't make out the words, but one was a man's, sharp and demanding. I thought it might be Mr. Reginald, but I didn't dare linger. Later I went outside to clear my head, and that's when Mr. Finch saw me. And the noise you mentioned, the thud near the study. Poirot pressed. "It was just before midnight," she said. "I thought it was a book falling, or perhaps a door. I was too frightened to investigate." "This house, it feels alive with secrets." Poirot Sipser's eyes narrowed. "And your background, mademoiselle. You are reserved yet educated. Where did you come from before Ashby Manor?" Clara Sip's lips tightened, and a shadow crossed her face. "I was a teacher in a small school in Devon. My references were sound, but my family is not one I speak of. They were disgraced years ago. I came here for a fresh start." Poirot noted the hesitation, the careful choice of words. "Disgraced? How so?" Clara Sip's voice dropped to a whisper. "My father was involved in a scandal, a theft, though he was never convicted. It ruined us. I've worked to rebuild my life, but I fear the past follows me." Poirot Sip's mind raced, connecting her words to the broader puzzle. A governess with a scandalous past. Overheard voices, nocturnal wanderings. Clara was a piece that didn't quite fit. "And the brooch," he said. "Did you ever see it before it was broken?" "Only once," Clara admitted. "Lady Eleanor showed it to me when I first arrived, as a symbol of the family heritage. She said it held a secret, but she never explained. I thought it beautiful, but unsettling. The sapphires seemed to watch you." Poirot Stet's expression remained inscrutable. "And last night, mademoiselle, where were you when the manor was disturbed?" "In my room," she said quickly. "I heard nothing until the maids spoke of it this morning." Poirot dismissed her with a nod, but his mind was far from satisfied. As Clara left, Hastings turned to him, his brow furrowed. "She seps hiding something, Poirot, but I can tell if it seps guilt or fear. That story about her father, do you think it seps connected?" "Perhaps, mon ami," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "Her past, it is a shadow that clings to her, but is she a victim, a witness, or something more? We must verify her story." Poirot sought out Lady Eleanor, who confirmed Clara Sip's employment history, but knew little of her background beyond her references. "She has been a good governess," Lady Eleanor said, "but quiet. I never pressed her about her family." Returning to the morning room, Poirot examined a small photograph on the mantel, a group portrait of the household from 2 years prior. Clara stood at the edge, her face partially obscured, but her posture was stiff, as if guarding a secret. Nearby, a maid's apron caught his eye, hung carelessly over a chair. He lifted it, revealing a faint stain, ink perhaps similar to that on the cryptic note from the previous night. "Kill you," Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the fabric. The note, the sapphire, the voices Clara heard, they suggest a conspiracy within these walls. Hastings paced, his frustration mounting. But who? Poirot, Reginald with his debts, Grayson with his shaky alibi, or Clara with her mysterious past? "All are possible," Poirot said, "but we lack the key, the secret of the brooch itself." Clara Sip's tale. It hints at knowledge she does not fully share. The voices she heard, the man Sip's anger, they point to a confrontation tied to the brooch Sip's destruction. As evening approached, Poirot returned to the study, drawn by an instinct he couldn't name. The room was as they'd left it, but his eyes fell on a small brass paperweight shaped like a rose. He lifted it, revealing a faint indentation in the desk beneath, a mark that matched the thud Clara described. "This," he said to Hastings, "is no accident. Something was struck here, perhaps in haste." The discovery deepened the mystery. Had Clara heard the brooch being broken, or something else? Was she a witness, or had she played a role? Poirot's little grey cells churned, weaving together the gardener's secrets, the midnight visitor, and now the governess's tale. The manor's walls seemed to close in, whispering of betrayal and hidden truths. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence. "This is like chasing shadows. Every clue leads to more questions." "Shadows, oui," Poirot replied, his voice firm, "but shadows cast by light. We are close, mon ami, to illuminating the truth. The governess has spoken, but her tale is only half told. The puzzle of the broken brooch grows clearer, and Poirot will not rest until it is solved." Chapter 8. A Pattern of Deception. The late afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows of Ashbourne Manor's library, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the oak floor. Hercule Poirot stood at its center, his small frame radiating intensity, as if the very air bent to his will. Before him, on a long table, lay a meticulous arrangement, the shattered remnants of the Ashbourne brooch, the cryptic note from the midnight visitor, the ink-stained apron, the torn scrap of grey fabric, and Lady Margaret's journal. Captain Hastings, pacing nearby, watched with a mix of awe and impatience. "Poirot, you've got all these bits and bobs spread out like a jigsaw puzzle," Hastings said, gesturing at the table. "Are you any closer to cracking this case?" "It said's been days of shadows and half-truths." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Mon ami, a puzzle is only chaos until the pattern emerges. The little grey cells, they see it now, a pattern of deception woven by those who wish to obscure the truth. Today we reconstruct the night the brooch was broken, and we shall find the thread that unravels all." Poirot began with the timeline, his voice precise as he recounted the events of that fateful evening. Dinner ended at 9 o'clock. Lady Eleanor retired to her rooms, Reginald to his, and Miss Dunham to check on the children. Mr. Grayson oversaw the staff, and Mrs. Langley lingered in the drawing-room. By midnight, Miss Dunham heard a thud near the study, and Mr. Finch saw her on the grounds. The brooch, locked in the study, was found broken the next morning. But the alibis, they do not align. Hastings frowned. "How so? They all claim to have been in their rooms." "Precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "And yet the study was disturbed, the brooch destroyed with force. Let us examine the alibis." He produced a notebook, its pages filled with neat script. "Reginald says he was drinking alone, but a maid saw him near the west wing at 10. Grayson claims he was in his quarters, yet the grey fabric matches his uniform. Miss Dunham admits to wandering the grounds, and Mrs. Langley, her room is closest to the study, yet she heard nothing. Curious, non?" Hastings nodded, his brow furrowing. "Someone sips lying, but who?" "Not one, mon ami, but several," Poirot said. "The lies, they form a pattern, like the threads of a tapestry. To find the truth, we must pull at the loose ends." He turned to the brooch's remnants, his fingers tracing the twisted gold. "The damage, it is deliberate, but not complete. One sapphire was found in the study, another in the kitchen. Why scatter the pieces?" As Poirot pondered, Lady Eleanor entered, her face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, have you made progress? The household is on edge." "Progress, oui," Poirot said, gesturing to the table. "But I require your assistance, madame. The brooch, it was unique, non? Yet, is there another piece of jewelry in this house? Perhaps one tied to the same history?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her eyes flickering with unease. "There is a locket passed down alongside the brooch. It belonged to Lady Charlotte, Margaret Sepp's sister. It's Sepp's less valuable, but it's Sepp's said to be a companion piece crafted at the same time." Poirot Sipp's eyes lit up. "A locket? And where is it kept?" "In my jewelry box upstairs," she said. "I rarely wear it. It sits plain compared to the brooch, but it has an inscription inside." "Show me, if you please," Poirot said, his tone urgent. They followed Lady Eleanor to her bedroom, a spacious chamber adorned with velvet and lace. She opened a rosewood jewelry box, revealing a silver locket, its surface etched with a delicate rose. Poirot opened it, revealing an inscription. To Charlotte, in trust. Inside, a tiny compartment held a folded slip of paper, yellowed with age. Poirot unfolded it, revealing a single line in faded ink. The key lies where the heart rests. The key again, Hastings muttered. That sits what the midnight note mentioned. Oui, Poirot said, his mind racing. The brooch and the locket, they are linked, not just by history but by purpose. The brooch was destroyed to hide its secret, but the locket, it may hold the answer. Lady Eleanor frowned. I never thought the locket significant. It has been in the family for generations, but no one speaks of it. Because it was overshadowed by the brooch, Poirot said. But Charlotte, she was not forgotten. Her envy, her betrayal, it lingers in this locket. Returning to the library, Poirot added the locket to his collection of clues. He turned to Hastings, his voice low. The timeline, the alibis, the locket. They point to a conspiracy. Someone in this house knew the brooch's secret and sought to destroy it, but they did not know of the locket, or did they? He summoned the household, one by one, to probe their alibis further. Reginald flushed with irritation, insisted he'd been in his room after 10, but his eyes darted nervously when Poirot mentioned the locket. Grayson, ever stoic, denied knowledge of it, though his hands clenched at the mention of Charlotte's name. Miss Dunham paled when shown the locket, claiming she'd never seen it, but her voice trembled. Langley, with her usual charm, feigned ignorance, but her curiosity about the inscription was too keen. The pattern, Poirot said to Hastings after the interviews, it is one of half-truths. Each protects something or someone. But the locket, it changes the game. It suggests the brooch Sep's secret was not destroyed, only displaced. As night fell, Poirot stood by the library window, the locket in his hand. The manor was quiet, but the silence was deceptive, heavy with unspoken truths. The timeline revealed discrepancies, the locket hinted at a hidden key, and the alibis crumbled under scrutiny. The deception, Poirot murmured. It is a web, and we are close to its center. Hastings, exhausted but intrigued, leaned closer. Poirot, do you think the locket Sep's inscription is literal? A key hidden somewhere? Perhaps, Poirot said. But the heart, mon ami, is not always a physical place. It may be a person, a motive, a truth. The pattern of deception is clear, but the final piece eludes us. We must watch, and we must listen, for the next move will reveal the hand behind this crime. The manor's shadows deepened, and Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, weaving together the scattered clues. The locket, the broken brooch, the midnight visitor, all were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and Poirot was determined to unravel it before the truth slipped away. Chapter 9. The Hidden Compartment. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the heavy clouds that hung over Ashpool Manor, casting a muted glow across the estate. Hercule Poirot, his mind a whirl of connections and contradictions, stood in Lady Eleanor's bedroom, his keen eyes scanning every detail. The discovery of the locket and its cryptic inscription, "The key lies where the heart rests," had ignited his little grey cells, urging him to search for answers in the private sanctum of the manor's mistress. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, hovered nearby, his curiosity tempered by the weight of the unfolding mystery. "Poirot, are you sure there sat something here?" Hastings asked, glancing at the ornate four-poster bed and the rosewood wardrobe. "We's had turned this house upside down already." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his unwavering resolve. "Mon ami, in a puzzle such as this, the truth hides in the places most intimate. The locket speaks of a heart, and Lady Eleanor Sep's room, it is the heart of this manor. We shall find what has been concealed." Poirot began his search with methodical precision, his gloved fingers tracing the edges of the furniture. He tapped the walls, listening for hollow echoes, and examined the floorboards for signs of tampering. His attention settled on a small writing desk in the corner, its surface cluttered with stationery and a silver mirror. The desk's drawers yielded nothing but letters and trinkets, but Poirot's instincts prickled. He knelt, inspecting the underside, and his fingers found a faint seam invisible to the casual eye. "Aha!" he exclaimed, pressing gently. A soft click sounded, and a narrow panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a bundle of old photographs, tied with a faded ribbon, and a single sheet of paper folded tightly. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he extracted the items, laying them on the desk. Hastings leaned closer, his breath catching. "Good Lord, Poirot! A secret compartment. What sep's in there?" Poirot untied the ribbon, revealing a dozen sepia-toned photographs. The first showed two women, one radiant and the other stern, both resembling Lady Eleanor in their features. The back of the photograph bore an inscription, "Margaret and Charlotte, 1823. Another depicted a young man, Tom Wickers perhaps, standing beside a woman who could only be Lady Eleanor's mother. The final photograph showed the Ashby brooch, intact, pinned to Margaret's gown, its sapphires catching the light. "The past speaks," Poirot murmured, turning to the folded paper. It was a letter, written in a precise hand, but the words were jumbled, a cipher that defied immediate understanding. The heading read, "For the heir of the vow." "A code," Hastings said, his excitement growing. "Can you crack it, Poirot?" "With patience, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice calm but intense. "The little grey cells, they thrive on such challenges. Fetch paper and pen. We shall decode this together." They sat at the desk, Poirot's mind dissecting the cipher. The text was a series of seemingly random letters, but patterns emerged under his scrutiny. "It is a substitution cipher," he said, "but with a twist. The key, it is tied to the locket's inscription where the heart rests. Let us try heart as the key word." Using the word heart as a guide, Poirot mapped the cipher, replacing letters according to a shifted alphabet. Slowly, the jumbled text resolved into a coherent message. "The brooch guards the vow of Margaret, betrayed by Charlotte. The key to the truth lies in the rose, hidden where none shall look." Hastings whistled softly. The rose again, first the paperweight, now this. What does it mean? Poirot's sipped eyes narrowed. The rose, it is a symbol in this family. The locket bore a rose. The paperweight was a rose. And now this message, the key. That is not a literal object, perhaps, but a place, a secret tied to the Ashball legacy. He turned to the photographs, studying Margaret's serene expression and Charlotte's pinched one. "The feud between these sisters," he said. "It is the root of this mystery, Charlotte's betrayal. It was not merely envy. She sought something, perhaps the same secret that led to the brooch's destruction." Poirot summoned Lady Eleanor, showing her the photographs and the decoded message. Her face paled as she read the words. This is my great-grandmother Sipta's hand," she said, her voice trembling, "but I never knew of a cipher or a rose. The brooch was the focus of our stories, not this." "And yet," Poirot said, "the locket, and this message suggest otherwise. Tell me, madam, is there a place in this manor associated with roses beyond the gardens?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her eyes distant. There sipped the rose room, a small parlour rarely used. It was Charlotte Sipt's favourite, named for the rose-patterned wallpaper, but its Sipt's been locked for years. Poirot Sipt's pulse quickened. "We must see this room, madam, at once." The rose room, tucked in the east wing, was a time capsule of faded elegance. Its wallpaper, adorned with roses, peeled at the edges, and the air was thick with dust. Poirot's torch swept the space, pausing on a small fireplace. Above it hung a portrait of Charlotte, her eyes cold and unyielding. Poirot tapped the mantel, listening for hollow sounds, but found nothing. He turned to the wallpaper, running his fingers along a seam near the portrait. A faint click revealed another hidden panel, but it was empty, its contents long gone.
"Someone has been here,"
Poirot said, noting scuff marks on the floor. "The rose hides the key, but the key has been taken." Hastings frowned. "Taken? By whom? The midnight visitor?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or someone who knew of this room Sitcha's significance. The pattern of deception grows clearer, mon ami. The brooch was destroyed to hide its secret, but the locket and this room, they point to a truth still within reach. As they left the rose room, Poirot's mind churned. The photographs, the cipher, the empty panel, all were pieces of a puzzle that stretched back to Margaret and Charlotte's feud. The manor's inhabitants, Reginald, Grayson, Clara, Beatrice, each held a piece of the truth, but their lies wove a web that obscured it. The hidden compartment had revealed much, but the key to the brooch's secret remained elusive. Poirot, Hastings said, his voice low, "This is getting deeper by the day. Do you think the rose is a place or something else?" "The rose," Poirot replied, "is a symbol of love, of betrayal, of secrets. It is the heart of the Ashboy legacy, and we are close to its truth. The little grey cells, they see the pattern, and soon, mon ami, the deception will unravel." The manor settled into an uneasy silence, but Poirot knew the calm was fleeting. The hidden compartment had opened a door to the past, and the shadows of Margaret and Charlotte loomed large. The puzzle of the broken brooch was nearing its heart, and Poirot was determined to find the key. Chapter 10. The Stolen Confession. The air in Ashbourne Manor was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath, awaiting the next revelation in the puzzle of the broken brooch. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his small frame a beacon of calm amidst the storm of suspicion that swirled among the household. The discovery of the hidden compartment, the coded message, and the rose room had brought him closer to the truth, but the pattern of deception remained elusive. Captain Hastings, pacing near the fireplace, cast anxious glances at the door where the manor's inhabitants would soon gather. "Poirot, we start running out of time," Hastings said, his voice low. "The locket, the cipher, the midnight visitor, someone Sepp's playing a dangerous game. What's Sepp's our next move?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his moustache twitching with resolve. "Mon ami, the next move is to provoke the truth. The little grey cells, they sense a witness on the verge of breaking. We shall apply pressure, and the guilty will falter." The household assembled, their faces a gallery of unease. Lady Eleanor, regal but strained, Reginald, his eyes bloodshot and defiant, Miss Clara Dunham, pale and withdrawn, Mr. Grayson, the butler, stiff as ever, and Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her smile a fragile mask. But it was one of the maids, a young woman named Elsie, who caught Poirot's attention. Her hands trembled as she served tea, and her eyes darted nervously to Grayson. "Mademoiselle Elsie," Poirot said, his voice gentle but commanding, "you have been quiet, yet you see much in this house. The night the brooch was broken, you were in the west wing. Non, what did you see?" Elsie froze, her tray clattering softly. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "The truth, mademoiselle. You know who broke the brooch, do you not? Speak, and Poirot will protect you." The room fell silent, all eyes on Elsie. Her lips quivered, and tears welled in her eyes. I saw someone, sir, in the study that night. I was fetching a shawl for Lady Eleanor, and I saw—" Her words were cut off by a sudden piercing scream from the hall. Hastings bolted for the door, Poirot closed behind. They found Elsie collapsed on the floor, clutching her arm, where a deep scratch bled through her sleeve. A shattered vase lay nearby, its shards scattered like the brooch's sapphires. "Someone pushed me," Elsie gasped, her face pale. "I didn't see who. They came from behind." Poirot knelt beside her, his expression grave. "Quickly, mademoiselle, tell me what you saw in the study." Elsie Seth's voice was a whisper, her eyes wide with terror. "It was a shadow, sir. I couldn't see their face, but they held the brooch, and I heard a crack like metal breaking. I ran before they saw me." "Who, Elsie?" Poirot pressed, his voice urgent. "A name." But Elsie's eyes fluttered, and she fainted, overcome by fear or shock. Poirot called for Grayson to fetch a doctor, his mind racing. "The confession, it was stolen from us," he said to Hastings. "Someone in this house fears her words. We must protect the others before they, too, are silenced. Protect the others before they, too, are silenced." As the household dispersed, tending to Elsie, Poirot gathered Hastings in the library. "This attack, it was no accident," he said, his voice low. "The culprit knows we are close. Elsie's confession, though incomplete, confirms the brooch was broken deliberately in the study by someone with access." Hastings frowned, his hands clenched. "But who?" "Poirot. Grayson was in the room, and Reginald Sepp's been acting cagey. Poirot Sepp's terrified, and Beatrice, her charm Sepp's wearing thin. All are suspect," Poirot said. "But the pattern emerges. The brooch, the locket, the cipher, they point to a secret worth killing for. Elsie Sepp's attacker acted to protect it, but they have made a mistake. The vase, Monet may. Examine it." They returned to the hall where the broken vase lay. Poirot Sepp's torch revealed a faint smear of blood on a shard. Not Elsie Sepp's, but someone else Sepp's. "The attacker was careless," he said, wrapping the shard in his handkerchief. "This blood, it will tell us more." Poirot then sought out Lady Eleanor, who was shaken by the attack. "Madame," he said, "Elsie saw someone in the study. The brooch set's destruction was no theft. It was an act of vengeance or concealment. Is there anyone in this house who might wish to bury the past?" Lady Eleanor's hands trembled. I cannot believe it of anyone here. But Reginald, he sees, been desperate for money. And Clara, she sees, been so secretive. I don't so's know what to think." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. He then questioned Grayson, whose stoic demeanor cracked slightly when shown the bloodied shard. "I know nothing of this, sir," he insisted. "I was with the others when Elsie screamed." "And yet," Poirot said, "you were quick to dismiss the curse, yet slow to provide an alibi. Be warned, monsieur, Poirot sees all." As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings searched Elsie's quarters, hoping for further clues. In a small tin beneath her bed, they found a scrap of paper, torn from a larger sheet, with the words "Beware" the rose scrawled in the same uneven hand as the midnight note. "Another warning," Poirot said, "or another misdirection. The rose, it haunts this case." Hastings paced, his frustration mounting. "Poirot, this is madness. A maid attacked. A confession cut short. Blood on a vase. How does it all fit?" "It fits, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice steady, "because it is a puzzle of human nature. Greed, fear, betrayal. These are the threads. Elsie Sepp's attacker fears exposure, but their haste betrays them. The blood, the note, the rose, they are signposts to the truth." Poirot returned to the drawing-room, where the household gathered, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. He held up the bloodied shard, his voice commanding, "Mesdames et messieurs, a witness has been silenced, but not before she spoke. The brooch was broken by someone in this room, and their secret is unraveling. Poirot will find the truth, and no act of violence will stop him." The room was silent, but the air crackled with tension. Elsie's confession, though stolen, had cracked the facade of deception. The bloodied shard, the warning note, the rose motif, all pointed to a culprit desperate to hide the past. Poirot's little grey cells churned, weaving together the clues, the broken brooch, the midnight visitor, the locket, the cipher, and now a silenced witness. The puzzle was nearing its climax, and Poirot was determined to protect the truth before it was lost forever. Chapter 11. The Masquerade Ball. The grand ballroom of Ashby Manor shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their light dancing across gilded masks and swirling gowns. The masquerade ball, an annual tradition, had proceeded despite the shadow of the broken brooch, as Lady Eleanor insisted on maintaining appearances. Hercule Poirot, clad in a sleek black suit and a simple domino mask, stood at the edge of the room, his sharp eyes piercing the festive facade. Captain Hastings, wearing a harlequin mask that clashed with his earnest demeanor, hovered nearby, his voice low with unease. "Poirot, is this really the time for a ball?" Hastings whispered, dodging a twirling couple. Elsie sat still recovering, and the culprit sat likely in this room, hiding behind a mask. "Precisement, mon ami," Poirot replied, his moustache barely visible beneath his mask. The masquerade, it is a gift, disguises loosened tongues and revealed truths. Tonight, the little grey cells will observe, and the guilty will betray themselves. The ballroom was a kaleidoscope of colour and motion, with guests from the nearby village mingling with the manor's inhabitants. Lady Eleanor, resplendent in a silver gown and a feathered mask, glided among the crowd, her smile strained. Reginald Ashby, his face half hidden by a wolf mask, lingered near the punch bowl, his movements unsteady from drink. Miss Clara Dunham, in a plain blue gown and a lace mask, kept to the shadows, her eyes darting nervously. Grayson, the butler, wore no mask, but served with his usual precision, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, radiant in a scarlet dress and a Venetian mask, laughed too loudly, her charm a calculated performance. Poirot's gaze swept the room, cataloguing every gesture. The masks, they hide the face but not the soul, he murmured to Hastings. Watch Reginald, his agitation grows, and Clara, she avoids the crowd. Something weighs on her. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Poirot moved through the throng, his small stature allowing him to slip unnoticed between dancers. He paused near a curtained alcove, where two figures spoke in hushed tones. One voice, sharp and male, was unmistakably Reginald's. "You've gone too far," he hissed. "If they find out, we're done for." The other voice, softer and feminine, replied, "Keep your nerve. The brooch is gone, and the secret with it." Poirot strained to identify the speaker, but the voice was muffled by the mask and the music. The pair parted before he could approach, leaving him with only fragments of their plot. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, rejoining Hastings. "A conspiracy, confirmed. Reginald is involved, but with whom we must follow." They trailed Reginald, who weaved through the crowd toward the terrace doors. Outside, the night air was sharp, the mist a ghostly veil over the gardens. Reginald met no one, but his pacing suggested a man awaiting a signal. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he spotted Clara emerging from a side door, her mask clutched in her hand, her face pale. She glanced at Reginald, then hurried toward the rose beds. "Curieux," Poirot said. "She avoids him, yet their paths converge. Let us see what Mademoiselle Dunham seeks." Before they could follow, a piercing crash echoed from the ballroom. Guests gasped as the central chandelier flickered, then plunged into darkness, its candles extinguished. Shouts of confusion filled the air, and Poirot's instincts flared. "Sabotage," he said, rushing back inside with Hastings. The ballroom was chaos, guests stumbling in the dim light of wall sconces. Lady Eleanor stood frozen, her mask discarded, while Grayson barked orders to the staff. Poirot's torch swept the floor, revealing a severed rope near the chandelier's pulley. "Deliberate," he said, his voice grim. Someone wished to disrupt the ball, and Poirot's observations. Hastings scanned the crowd. "But why? To stop you from overhearing more, or to create a diversion," Poirot said. "Quickly, mon ami, find Clara." She was headed to the gardens. They hurried outside, the mist swallowing the manor's lights. In the rosebeds they found Clara kneeling, her hands digging frantically in the soil. She froze as Poirot's torch illuminated her, a small metal box clutched in her hands. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice stern, "what is this you hide?" Clara Sip's eyes were wild with fear. I found it," she stammered. "I heard someone mention the roses, and I thought it might be important." Poirot took the box, its surface rusted but intact. Inside was a single sapphire, identical to those from the brooch, and a folded note. He unfolded it, revealing a map of the manor's grounds, with an X marked near the rosebeds. The handwriting matched the midnight visitor's note. "The truth lies buried." "A breakthrough," Poirot said, his pulse quickening. "This sapphire, this map, they are pieces of the puzzle, but why bury them, unless to hide them from another?" Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't break the brooch, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it. I only wanted to understand why everyone sat so afraid." Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was relentless. "You heard voices, mademoiselle, and now you dig in the night. You know more than you say. Return to the manor, and speak to no one." As Clara fled, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The sabotage, the map, the sapphire, they are acts of desperation. The culprit fears exposure, and the ball has forced their hand." Back in the ballroom, the lights were restored, but the mood was fractured. Poirot summoned Lady Eleanor, showing her the map and sapphire. Her face paled. This is from the brooch. But why here in the gardens?" "The rose," Poirot said. "It is the key, as the cipher promised. The map points to a truth buried, perhaps literally. We must search the rose beds at dawn." As the ball wound down, Poirot observed the suspects. Reginald's agitation had turned to sullen silence. Grayson's efficiency seemed forced, and Beatrice's laughter rang hollow. Clara, back among the guests, avoided eye contact, while Elsie, recovered but shaken, watched from the sidelines. "Poirot," Hastings said, "that conversation you overheard, Reginald and someone else. Could it be the key to all this?" "Oui," Poirot replied. "But the key is not one thing, mon ami. It is a truth, a motive, hidden in the roses, the brooch, the locket. The masquerade has unmasked more than faces tonight. The little grey cells, they are close to the truth." The manor settled into a restless quiet, but Poirot knew the sabotage was a desperate act. The map, the sapphire, the overheard plot, all pointed to a culprit cornered by their own deception. The puzzle of the broken brooch was nearing its resolution, and Poirot was ready to unearth the truth buried in the roses. Chapter 12. The Truth Unraveled. The drawing-room of Ashbourne Manor was a stage set for revelation, its heavy drapes drawn against the grey dawn, casting the room in a sombre glow. Hercule Poirot stood at its centre, his small frame commanding the attention of all present. The suspects, Lady Eleanor Ashby, Reginald Ashby, Miss Clara Dunham, Mr. Grayson, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, and the maid Elsie, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a gallery of apprehension, defiance, and fear. Captain Hastings, by the fireplace, watched with bated breath, knowing Poirot's denouement was imminent. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant. "The puzzle of the broken brooch has tested the little grey cells, but the truth, it is now clear. The brooch, a symbol of the Ashboy legacy, was destroyed not by accident but by design. Tonight, Poirot will reveal who, how, and why." He paced slowly, his eyes sweeping over the assembled. "Let us begin with the night of the crime. The brooch was locked in Lady Eleanor's study, yet it was found shattered. A sapphire was left on the floor, another in the kitchen, and a third in the rose beds. Why scatter the pieces? To mislead, to suggest theft or carelessness. But the damage was precise, the work of one who knew its secret." Lady Eleanor Set's hands tightened. "But what secret, Monsieur Poirot? I knew only of a vow, nothing more." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, madam. The clues, they tell the story. The torn grey fabric, matching Mr. Grayson's uniform, pointed to his presence in the study. The thud Miss Dunham heard, the mark of a rose-shaped paperweight, suggested force. The locket inscribed to Charlotte hinted at a companion piece. The cipher, the photographs, the map buried in the rose beds, all led to a truth hidden for a century." He turned to the table, where the brooch's remnants lay beside the locket and the decoded cipher. The brooch was not merely an heirloom. It contained a hidden compartment, revealed when Poirot examined it closely. Inside, a tiny key, now missing, once rested, a key to a safe hidden in the rose room where Margaret's legacy was guarded. Reginald shifted, his face pale. "A safe? What legacy?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The legacy of Lady Margaret Ashby, betrayed by her sister Charlotte. The photographs showed their feud. The cipher spoke of a vow betrayed. Margaret, fearing Charlotte's envy, hid a fortune, jewels, deeds, and a confession of her own in a safe locked by the brooch's key. Charlotte, in her rage, caused Margaret's disappearance, but never found the safe. The secret passed to Eleanor's mother, then to Eleanor, though she knew it only as a vague vow. Beatrice Langley laughed, her voice brittle. "A fortune? This is absurd, Monsieur Poirot." "None, madame," Poirot said, his tone sharp. "The fortune is real, and its discovery drove the destruction of the brooch. Let us reconstruct the night. At 10, Reginald was seen near the west wing, arguing with Grayson. At midnight, Miss Dunham heard a thud, the brooch being broken. Elsie saw a figure in the study, and Finch saw Clara on the grounds. The midnight visitor, leaving a note and a sapphire, sought to confuse us, but the pattern of deception points to one truth." He turned to Grayson, whose stoic facade cracked. "Monsieur Grayson, you have served this family for 30 years. You knew of Tom Wickers, the groundskeeper who vanished, close to Eleanor's mother. You knew the brooch's secret, learned from years of listening. You broke the brooch, seeking the key to the safe, driven by greed for the fortune." Grayson Sett's face reddened. "That Sett's preposterous. I am loyal to this family." "Loyal, oui, but tempted," Poirot said. "The grey fabric was yours, torn when you forced the desk. The blood on the vase shard from Elsie's attack matches a cut on your hand, sustained when you pushed her to silence her confession. You worked with another, Reginald, whose debts made him your accomplice." Reginald leapt to his feet. "Lies! I sept never—" "Silence!" Poirot Sip's voice cut through. "You argued with Grayson, fearing exposure. The overheard conversation at the ball confirmed your pact. But you were betrayed, monsieur, by your own accomplice." Poirot turned to Beatrice. "Madame Langley, your charm masked your role. You, a collector of stories, knew of the Ashworth fortune from old letters you found in your youth with Eleanor. You encouraged Reginald, playing on his desperation, but you also manipulated Grayson, promising him a share. The note, the sapphires, they were your misdirection to keep Poirot chasing shadows." Beatrice says. Smile vanished. "You have no proof." "Proof, madame, is in the details," Poirot said. "The ink on the apron used for your notes matches your pen. The map in the rosebeds buried by you led to an empty safe. You had already taken the fortune, but you needed the brooch destroyed to hide the key sap's purpose." Clara gasped, her hands trembling. "But why involve me?" "You, mademoiselle, were a pawn," Poirot said gently. "Your wanderings, your fear, they made you a convenient suspect. Beatrice planted the sapphire in the kitchen, knowing you used it to cast suspicion." Lady Eleanor Serfst's voice was a whisper. "The fortune, is it gone?" "Oui, madame," Poirot said. "The safe in the rose room emptied by Beatrice before the ball. But the truth remains. The brooch was broken to hide the key, the fortune stolen by greed, and the past betrayed by vengeance. Beatrice's revenge for being excluded from the Ashby legacy, a grudge from her youth." The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words crushing. Grayson's shoulders slumped, Reginald sank into his chair, and Beatrice's eyes burned with defiance, but she said nothing. Elsie, recovered, nodded faintly, her confession vindicated. "The puzzle is solved," Poirot said, his voice softening. "The little grey cells have unraveled the deception. The brooch, a symbol of love and betrayal, is restored in truth, if not in form." As the suspects were led away, Hastings turned to Poirot, his eyes wide. "You did it, Poirot." "But how did you know?" "The pattern, mon ami," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "The lies, the clues, the motives, they formed a tapestry, and Poirot merely followed the threads. The truth, it is always there, waiting to be seen." The drawing-room emptied, leaving only the echo of Poirot's words. The broken brooch, a shattered relic of the Ashby past, had revealed its secret, and the manor, though scarred, was free of its shadow. The puzzle was complete, but Poirot knew the human heart would always weave new mysteries. Chapter 13. The Final Piece. The morning mist that had clung to Ashby Manor for days had finally lifted, revealing a sky of pale blue over the sprawling estate. Hercule Poirot sat in the library, a cup of tisane in hand, his sharp eyes softened by a rare moment of contemplation. The puzzle of the broken brooch had been solved, its threads of greed, revenge, and betrayal unraveled in the drawing-room the previous night. Yet, as always, the resolution left ripples in its wake. Captain Hastings, seated across from him, stirred his tea absently, his face a mix of relief and melancholy. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you have done it again. Beatrice, Grayson, and Reginald caught red-handed, but I can set help feeling sorry for Lady Eleanor. Her family sep's in tatters." Poirot Sep's moustache twitched, his gaze fixed on the library sep's window, where the garden stretched toward the horizon. "Oui, mon ami, the truth. It is a double-edged sword. It frees, but it wounds. The Ashby family, they bear the scars of their past, but they will heal. Poirot has seen to that." The denouement had been a storm of revelations. Beatrice Langley, driven by a decades-old grudge, had orchestrated the theft of the hidden fortune, manipulating Grayson's greed and Reginald's desperation. The brooch, a symbol of Margaret's vow, had been destroyed to conceal its key to the safe in the Rose Room. Elsie's near-fatal encounter, the scattered sapphires, the cryptic notes, and the locket's inscription, all had pointed to a conspiracy rooted in the feud between Margaret and Charlotte. Yet, as Poirot sipped his tisane, he knew one final piece remained. "Tell me, Poirot," Hastings said, leaning forward. "How did you know the safe was in the Rose Room? And what about the brooch sets? True value, you hinted at something more last night." Poirot's eyes gleamed, a spark of satisfaction. "The little grey cells. Mon ami, they see what others overlook. The cipher, the key lies where the heart rests," pointed to the Rose Room, Charlotte's sanctuary. The map in the rosebeds confirmed it. But the brooch's value, it was not merely in gold or sapphires, nor even in the fortune it guarded. "Come, let us visit Lady Eleanor one last time." They found Lady Eleanor in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She looked weary, but a quiet strength lingered in her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising, "I owe you my gratitude. The truth is painful, but it has freed us from the shadows." "Madam," Poirot said, bowing slightly, "the truth is never complete without all its pieces. The brooch, it held a key. Oui, but its true value was in what it preserved, a confession hidden within its compartment." Lady Eleanor frowned. "A confession. I thought the safe held the fortune, jewels, deeds, taken by Beatrice." "Oui, the safe held those," Poirot said, "but the brooch sep's compartment, it contained a letter from Margaret, written before her disappearance. Poirot found it this morning, overlooked in the chaos. It was not jewels that drove Beatrice, but fear of this letter sep's truth." He produced a fragile sheet, its ink faded, but legible. Margaret's words spoke of Charlotte's betrayal, not just envy, but an act of violence. Margaret had uncovered Charlotte's plot to steal the family's wealth, a plan thwarted by hiding the fortune in the safe. Margaret's disappearance, the letter revealed, was no accident. She had fled to protect her daughter, leaving the brooch as a guardian of the truth. The brooch's true value, Poirot said, was its power to expose Charlotte's crime. Beatrice, your childhood friend, knew this from old letters she found in her youth. She sought to destroy the brooch to bury the scandal, ensuring her family's name, linked to Charlotte's descendants, remained untarnished. The fortune was a bonus, but the confession was her fear. Lady Eleanor Sell's eyes filled with tears. "My great-grandmother, she suffered to protect us. And I never knew." Poirot Sips's voice softened. "You carry her strength, madam. The fortune is gone, but the truth endures. The Ashburnham legacy is not in wealth, but in resilience." As they left the conservatory, Hastings shook his head. "It sets a bitter twist, Poirot. Beatrice destroyed her friendship with Eleanor for nothing. The fortune set's gone, and the scandal sets out. Such is the nature of greed and revenge," Poirot said, his tone philosophical. "They blind the heart to what matters. Beatrice sought to erase the past, but the past, it always speaks." They walked through the gardens where the rosebeds, once a hiding place for clues, now bloomed in quiet beauty. Poirot paused, his gaze distant. The puzzle, it is complete, but it leaves a question, mon ami. What is justice? To punish Beatrice, Grayson, and Reginald, or to let the Ashburnham family heal? Hastings frowned. They face the law, one set they. Theft, assault on Elsie, that sips as serious. Oui, Poirot said. But the heart of justice is not in punishment alone. It is in understanding why they acted, what drove them. Beatrice sips grudge. Grayson sips greed. Reginald sips desperation. They are human, flawed, and now exposed. They returned to the library, where Poirot gathered the case's relics, the broken brooch, the locket, the cipher, the map, the bloodied shard. Each was a testament to his method, a thread in the tapestry he had woven. The little grey cells, he said. They see the truth, but the heart it feels the cost. As they prepared to leave Ashby Manor, Lady Eleanor approached, her expression resolute. Monsieur Poirot, the brooch will be restored, as best we can. Not for its jewels, but for Margaret Sipp's memory. And Clara, she Sipp's staying to help the children heal. The manor will survive this. Poirot bowed, his respect genuine. You are the true heir of the vow, madame. The Ashburnham legacy is safe in your hands. The train to London awaited, and as Poirot and Hastings boarded, the manor faded into the distance, its secrets laid bare. Hastings leaned back, his voice reflective. It Sipp's a strange case, Poirot. The brooch Sipp's value wasn't Sipped in gold, but in truth makes you wonder what else we miss. Poirot smiled, his eyes bright. The human heart, mon ami, it is the greatest puzzle. We seek wealth, power, revenge, but the true value lies in what we protect, love, honor, truth. The little grey cells, they solve the mystery, but the heart, it understands its meaning. The train's whistle sounded, and Ashby Manor vanished behind the horizon. The puzzle of the broken brooch was solved, its final piece a testament to Poirot's genius and the enduring power of truth. The little grey cells rested, but Poirot knew another mystery would soon call.